Begin. Silas lived in a quiet corner of the valley, a place where tall pines touched the sky and a clear stream chuckled over smooth stones. His small cabin, built from sturdy logs, looked out over fields of green grass that swayed gently in the breeze. Most folks in the valley knew of Silas, though few knew him well. He was a man of few words, his face etched with lines that spoke of sun and wind, and eyes that missed nothing. He spent his days tending a small garden, carving wooden birds, and sometimes just sitting on his porch, watching the light change on the mountains. What most people remembered about Silas, if they remembered anything beyond his quiet nature, was the whisper of his past. A long time ago, they said he was the best shot in the whole territory. Not just good, but amazing. He could hit a coin tossed in the air, or shoot a knot from a rope at distances that seemed impossible. He never talked about it, and his old rifle, kept spotless, hung on hooks above his fireplace, a silent reminder of a skill he no longer used. Begin. While Silas lived a peaceful life, the valley wasn't always quiet. Two boys, Jed and Ben, often stirred up dust wherever they went. They were brothers, close in age, and known for their scraped knees and wild hair. Jed, the older one, had a quick grin and was always ready for an adventure. Ben, a little quieter, watched everything with sharp, curious eyes. They had no family, no one to tell them what to do, so they mostly did as they pleased, which often meant getting into small scrapes or playing pranks on the valley folk. They lived on the edges of town, making do with odd jobs and the kindness of neighbors. But their true playground was the wild woods and streams. They'd often sneak through the trees, their bare feet silent on the forest floor, until they were close to Silas's cabin. The quiet man fascinated them. They'd heard the whispers, too, about his amazing shooting skills. They'd seen his rifle hanging above the fireplace through his open window, glinting in the sunlight. To them, Silas wasn't just an old man. He was a mystery, a legend, and a source of endless curiosity. They often wondered what it would be like to shoot a rifle like that. Begin. One afternoon, as Jed and Ben crouched behind a thick bush, trying to get a better look at Silas's rifle, a voice, low but firm, made them jump. "You boys planning on staying out there all day, or are you going to come in and help with these weeds?" Silas stood on his porch, a small smile playing on his lips. Startled, the boys stumbled out, faces red. Silas didn't scold them. Instead, he looked at them, truly looked, and saw not just two scruffy, curious children, but a spark of sharpness in their eyes that reminded him of himself, long ago. He saw their wild energy, but also a deep need for something more. "If you want to learn things," Silas said, "there are rules. First, you help me around here. Second, you listen. Always. No fooling around when important things are being taught." Jed and Ben, usually restless, nodded quickly, their eyes wide with a mix of surprise and hope. This was better than any prank. Their journey with Silas began not with guns, but with pulling stubborn weeds from his garden, chopping firewood, and learning the quiet rhythm of work and respect. Begin. After weeks of weeding, hauling water, and stacking firewood, the day finally came. Silas led Jed and Ben to a clearing behind his cabin. He took his old rifle from its hooks, its polished wood gleaming. The air filled with the faint, sharp smell of gun oil, a scent that would forever remind the boys of this moment. Silas didn't just hand them the rifle. He showed them how to hold it, first with empty hands, then with the weight of the firearm resting just right in their grip. "This is not a toy," he said, his voice serious. "It's a tool. A serious tool that demands respect." He taught them about balance, about letting the rifle become an extension of their arm. Then came the loading. Silas broke it down into slow, careful steps. He showed them how to pick up a cartridge, how to slide it smoothly into the chamber without fumbling, and how the bolt clicked shut with a satisfying sound. They practiced again and again, their fingers clumsy at first, but slowly gaining a rhythm. Jed learned to be quick, Ben to be precise. Silas watched, correcting their posture, their breathing, instilling in them the patience and focus needed before they even thought of aiming. Begin. Once the boys understood the rifle, Silas turned to another key part of life in the valley: horses. He had two sturdy, calm horses, one for each boy, that he'd been keeping ready. The first thing Jed and Ben learned was how to approach a horse, softly, calmly, letting the animal know they meant no harm. Then came the saddles. Silas showed them how to throw the heavy leather over the horse's back, how to tighten the straps just right, feeling the thick, worn leather under their hands. It smelled of sun, sweat, and a long journey. At first, sitting atop the tall animals felt strange, like balancing on a wobbly tower. Silas walked beside them, teaching them how to hold the reins, how to use their legs to tell the horse what to do. Soon, they were trotting, the gentle bounce becoming familiar. Then came the canter, a faster, rocking rhythm. Silas pushed them, making them practice staying steady even when the horses broke into a gallop across the open fields. He'd have them stand in the stirrups, then sit deep in the saddle, feeling the powerful muscles of the horse beneath them. They learned to move with the horse, to become one with the animal, no matter the speed. And begin. Days blurred into weeks, and weeks into months, each sunrise bringing a new set of drills. Their mornings began before the sun peaked over the mountain peaks. First, a quick meal, then out to the clearing. Silas had set up a range of targets: pine cones, old tin cans, and marks drawn on bark. The air would often echo with the sharp crack of the rifle as Jed and Ben practiced their aim. They learned to control their breathing, to find their natural point of aim, and to make each shot count. Silas would stand behind them, a silent guide, occasionally offering a quiet word of advice. After shooting, they'd head to the small stable. They groomed their horses until their coats shone, then saddled them up. Their riding lessons were not just about speed. Silas taught them about endurance and control. They would ride for hours, exploring every path and hidden trail in the valley, learning its dips and rises, its secrets. They practiced riding and shooting at the same time, a tricky skill that took many falls and much patience. Slowly, their muscles grew stronger, their hands steadier, and their connection with both their horses and their rifles became seamless. And begin. The change in Jed and Ben was clear to anyone who saw them. Their rough edges softened, replaced by a quiet confidence. The wild, untamed energy they once had was now channeled into purpose. They still had their playful moments, chasing each other through the woods or splashing in the stream, but there was a new focus in their eyes. Their clothes, though still simple, were now clean, their hair neatly combed. They walked with a different stride, heads held higher, back straighter. They no longer snuck around Silas's cabin. They walked right up to the door, knocking politely. They called him Mr. Silas, a sign of their deep respect and growing affection. He had given them more than skills. He had given them a home, a purpose, and a sense of belonging. They were fiercely loyal to him, listening to his every word, eager to please. The mischievous boys had slowly, steadily, become steady young men, ready to take on whatever challenges the world might throw their way, all thanks to the patient guidance of the quiet man in the cabin. And begin. Life in the valley settled into a happy rhythm. The young men, Jed and Ben, continued their training, their laughter often mixing with the sharp crack of practice shots. But one crisp autumn morning, a rider, dusty and breathless, galloped into town, bringing with him a shadow that fell over the valley's peace. His news spread like wildfire, turning cheerful faces pale with fear. The Black Vultures, a mean group of hired fighters, were on their way. The Black Vultures were not just any outlaws. They were a brutal militia, known for taking what they wanted and leaving ruin behind. They had passed through years ago, demanding tribute, roughing up anyone who resisted. The valley folks had paid then, hoping they would never return. But now word was they were coming back, bigger and meaner than before, with plans to seize the entire valley for themselves. They wanted the rich farmlands, the timber, and control over the river. Fear gripped the hearts of every man, woman, and child. The valley, once so peaceful, now buzzed with whispers of dread and helplessness. And begin. Panic rippled through the valley. Meetings were held in hushed tones, but no solutions emerged. The farmers and shopkeepers were good, honest folk, but they were not fighters. They knew how to sow seeds and trade goods, not how to stand against armed men. Their rifles were for hunting deer, not for defending their homes against a trained militia. There were only a few older men who had seen any kind of fighting, and they were too frail now to lift a heavy rifle for long. Eyes turned to Silas, the old sharpshooter. But he was old now, his hair as white as winter snow, his movements slower. He had not touched a weapon in earnest for many years. Some hoped he might somehow conjure a miracle, but even he seemed burdened by the news. "They'll come through the narrow pass," he murmured, his voice heavy with worry. "It's the only way." Despair settled over the valley like a thick fog. No one knew what to do. No one knew how to protect their families, their homes, and their way of life in the coming storm. And begin. As despair filled the air, two figures approached Silas's cabin, their steps firm and unhesitant. It was Jed and Ben, no longer the scruffy boys who had once snuck through the bushes. They stood tall, their shoulders broad, their faces serious. "Mr. Silas," Jed began, his voice steady, "we heard the news. Folks are scared, and they don't know what to do." Ben nodded, his eyes meeting Silas's with a quiet strength. "They're right to be scared," Ben added, "but we're not helpless." Silas looked at them, a flicker of surprise in his old eyes. He saw the years of training reflected in their confident stance, the discipline in their gaze. "What do you propose?" he asked, a hint of hope in his voice. Jed took a deep breath. "You taught us, Mr. Silas. You taught us to shoot straight and ride true. You taught us this valley, every path, every hiding spot. This is our home. These are our people." Ben finished. "We're ready. We can protect them. We will defend the valley." The words hung in the air, a beacon of courage in the spreading gloom. "And begin." Silas's eyes, usually tired, now gleamed with a new light. He pulled out a worn map of the valley, spreading it across his rough-hewn table. "The black vultures will come through the Devil's Tooth Pass," he confirmed, tracing a narrow, winding line with his finger. "It's the quickest way in, but also the most dangerous for them, if defended right." Jed and Ben leaned in, their minds already working. Their plan was simple, yet clever, born from countless hours spent riding every inch of the valley. Jed spoke first, pointing to a high ridge overlooking the pass. "Ben and I know every rock up there. We can move fast, silent. We'll be above them, hidden," Ben added. "And with the horses, we can disappear and reappear, making them think there are more of us." Their skills, once just drills, were now pieces of a desperate puzzle. They would use their precise shooting to pick off targets from a distance, and their riding to confuse and scatter the militia. The goal wasn't to defeat them in a big battle, but to make the pass so dangerous and confusing that the black vultures would turn back, believing the valley was too costly to take. And begin. The air in Devil's Tooth Pass grew heavy with waiting. Jed and Ben, hidden high on a rocky outcrop, lay still as statues, their rifles resting steady. Silas was further back, watching with a borrowed spyglass. The only sound was the wind whispering through the pines and the steady thrum of their own heartbeats. Then, a faint rumble, growing louder. Hoofbeats. The black vultures were here. The militia rode into the pass, a grim line of hardened men, their dark clothes and rough faces a stark contrast to the peaceful valley. They were loud, their shouts echoing off the stone walls. Jed looked at Ben, and Ben gave a small, confident nod. They remembered Silas's words. Asterisk patience. Focus. One shot, one target. Asterisk. Jed sighted down his rifle, his breathing slow and even. He picked out the lead rider's horse. A clean shot, not to harm the man, but to stop the horse. The crack of his rifle split the silence, and the lead horse reared, throwing its rider. Chaos erupted. Ben followed quickly, his shot disabling another horse further back. They worked as one, a silent, deadly team, just as Silas had trained them, their movements precise and without wasted effort. And begin. The militia, now disoriented, shouted orders, but their voices were lost in the echoing pass. Jed and Ben, having fired their initial shots, swiftly moved. They slid down the rocky slope, nimble as mountain goats, and landed softly beside their horses, which Silas had tethered nearby. With a whisper and a gentle touch, they were in their saddles, the familiar feel of the worn leather a comfort. The horses, trained for this, moved with silent speed. From one hidden spot, then another, the sharp cracks of their rifles continued. They didn't aim for the men, but for their horses, their supplies, anything to cause confusion and slow them down. The black vultures couldn't figure out where the shots were coming from. One moment, a bullet would whiz past a rider from the left. The next, a saddlebag would burst on the right. The sound of hooves thundered as Jed and Ben rode, weaving through the brush, using every dip and rise in the land as cover. They were ghosts, striking swiftly, then vanishing, making the small force seem like a dozen skilled attackers. The militia's horses, spooked by the sudden shots and strange movements, added to the growing disarray. And begin. Every single detail Silas had taught them now mattered more than ever. The way he insisted they clean their rifles after every use meant the firing pins wouldn't stick, ensuring each shot rang true. The countless hours spent practicing loading, even blindfolded, allowed them to reload their weapons without a second thought, their fingers working swiftly and surely even in the heat of the moment. The feel of the smooth wood stock against their cheek, the familiar weight of the rifle, all contributed to their steady aim. And the riding, oh, the riding. The hours spent in the saddle, learning to move as one with their horses, to anticipate every twist and turn, meant they could gallop full speed through rocky terrain without faltering. The leather of the saddle, worn smooth from practice, was a natural extension of their bodies. They could fire a precise shot while leaning low in the saddle, then guide their horse into a sharp turn, disappearing behind a boulder before the militia could react. It was a dance of precision and speed, a testament to Silas's patient teaching. Each drill, each repetition, each quiet correction had built them into the formidable force they now were. And begin. The black vultures were used to easy victories, to people cowering and surrendering their valuables. But this was different. Shots came from nowhere, horses bucked and fell, and their own riders were getting separated in the narrow, winding pass. The militia leader, a burly man with a scarred face, roared orders, but his men were becoming frantic. They fired wildly into the rocks, hitting nothing but stone. They couldn't see their attackers, only hear the precise cracks of rifles and the thud of objects being struck. It was like fighting ghosts. Every time they tried to regroup, another horse would stumble, another supply bag would tear open, scattering food and ammunition. Panic began to set in. This wasn't a fight, it was a nightmare. They were losing men, not to direct hits, but to falls in fear, and they couldn't even find their enemy. The leader, seeing his men losing their nerve, finally bellowed, "Pull back. This ain't worth it. There's too many of them." He realized they were up against something far more skilled and elusive than they had ever faced. The valley was not going to be an easy prize. And begin. The sound of retreating hooves slowly faded, replaced by the silence of the pass. Jed and Ben rode back to Silas, their faces grim but their eyes bright with triumph. The valley was safe. Word spread quickly through the anxious town. When Jed and Ben rode into the town square, the fear on people's faces melted away, replaced by gasps of surprise, then cheers. They were no longer just the orphan boys, the wild ones. They were the valley's saviors. Men and women rushed forward, patting them on the back, offering them food and drink. Children, who had hidden in their homes just hours before, now ran up to touch their horses. The cheers grew louder and louder, echoing through the small town. "Jed, Ben, heroes," they shouted, their voices filled with gratitude and awe. The boys, who had only ever known a quiet life with Silas, were suddenly the center of attention. They looked a little shy, a little overwhelmed, but also incredibly proud. The families of the valley, who thought all hope was lost, now looked upon these two young men with new eyes, seeing not just boys, but the brave defenders of their home. And begin. Silas stood on the edge of the crowd, a quiet figure among the boisterous celebration. His old eyes, usually calm, held a profound depth of emotion as he watched Jed and Ben, surrounded by the grateful townsfolk. He saw not just the heroes of the hour, but the transformation of two wild, lost boys into strong, honorable young men. Every precise shot, every quick maneuver on horseback, every act of courage he had just witnessed was a direct result of the long, patient hours he had poured into their training. A small, knowing smile touched his lips. He hadn't fought with a rifle in years, but his true fight had been in shaping these two. He had given them the tools, yes, but more importantly, he had given them discipline, respect, and a sense of purpose. It was not his old skills that had saved the valley, but the seeds he had planted in the hearts and minds of Jed and Ben. He knew, with a quiet certainty, that his life's most important work had been done. The valley was safe, not because of a single old sharpshooter, but because of the legacy he had built in two young men. And begin. Jed and Ben, no longer the scruffy, unnoticed orphans, stood tall in the town square. Their faces, once marked by youthful mischief, now carried the serious lines of responsibility and quiet strength. They were no longer just brothers. They were the valley's protectors, their names whispered with respect and gratitude. The journey from wild boys to defenders had changed them forever, molding them into men ready for any challenge. They often visited Silas, sharing meals and quiet moments on his porch, the rifle still hanging above the fireplace, now a symbol of shared history and purpose. The valley, once a place they simply roamed, was now their home, their charge. They knew every hidden path, every whispering tree, and they understood the responsibility that came with that knowledge. As the sun set, painting the sky in hues of orange and purple, Jed and Ben would stand on a high ridge overlooking the valley, their eyes scanning the horizon. They were ready, ready to defend, ready to protect, ready for whatever the future held, forever shaped by the quiet man who had seen something special in two rough boys. And